When building your websites, do you prefer to use custom code for advanced functionality, or do you prefer to use something that's pre-built plugins from the plugin repository that you can just slap onto the website? I remember when I was a freelancer, I was just starting out with my WordPress development career. I loved custom coding. I loved the challenge. Like, you have the call with the clients and then you figure out what type of functionality they really need, and you help them understand why they need that functionality and why what they want probably is not what they need. And then you condense down the most basic stuff and you build a custom plugin for that. That was so much fun and I still love it. From time to time, it's still a nice challenge. However, I transitioned to using more of the ready-made plugins where I can get support, where I can get help with that. And in this video, I want to break down the pros and cons of either of these choices that you can make, and stick with me to the end of the video to see how much time I saved in my business by actually going with the ready-made plugin solution. You won't believe it. Hey, my name is Jan Koch. I'm the CEO of Virtual Summit Mastery, and you might know me from the WP Agency Summit and from being involved in the WordPress community on podcasts and other sorts of events. And in this video, I want to share a bit of my experience on building websites and then how my team is structuring the website process now, so that when it comes to deciding whether we want to use a plugin that's already available or whether we want to build something from scratch, and be it with a framework like ACF or like all the other alternatives for that, we have a really good decision-making process, I feel, that I want to share with you. But first of all, let's talk about why you need such a decision-making process, why you cannot just simply go with your gut feeling. Reason number one is probably the elephant in the room, and that is maintainability in the long run. And that is something I heavily underestimated when I was just starting out as a freelancer. It was 2012, 2013, something around that. WordPress was way different compared to what it is right now. And over time, it became really, really expensive in terms of time investment and also in terms of hiring developers to maintain the plugins that I had written back then. Because if we are honest, unless we are writing code for a living, and we do that for 25 years, we are not proficient at writing code. And probably the more you learn about coding, the more you realize how little you know. That is why many coders from my experience struggle with imposter syndrome. Is you compare yourself to what is being shared on GitHub, on all those amazing coding tutorials websites, and you go through boot camps and you constantly learn and stuff like that. And you get to a level where your code does what you need it to do, and it runs stable and it doesn't slow down a WordPress website, and that's all great. But as a developer, you always have this nudging in the back of your mind that there is more that you could do, that there is a better way to build something. And especially when it comes to maintainability and compatibility with future updates, it is more time expensive and more time consuming to write custom code and then to maintain it, rather than to have a plugin that is ready-made by a team that is going to be there in 5 years from now. You obviously evaluate how good the team is and what the long-term vision is. And if you think that their support is going to be good 5 years from now, then you can run with it and you save a lot of time in maintaining the client websites. The second point is compatibility with other plugins right now. So you might find that once you finish a project and you don't onboard the client on a retainer, for example, and you just hand the website over to them, they slap on some random plugin that breaks the website because it's not compatible with what you have built. And you can tell them as much as you want in the handoff process, actually. They will probably still break the site at some point. And if then you have custom code on the website, the easiest way for them to find somebody to blame is to point at your custom code. And whether it is the problem or not, that's the angle they're likely going to take. And you can save yourself from that hassle by avoiding custom code and by relying on the plugins that other people build, kind of delegating that responsibility and the requirements for compatibility, if you want, to a different team, so that when you hand over the client website, you can clearly document, like, you should do this in any case, by the way. We have built a website. It works as it is right now. And if you don't go with a retainer on us, that is how it is supposed to work. If you change anything, if you update anything, which you should, you might break compatibility. If you introduce new plugins, you might break compatibility. And that is then saving you from being responsible when the site breaks after you hand over the project and clients coming back to you requesting charges or stuff like that. And it's also making your life a lot easier just communicating down the road. Now, the third reason is that custom code can easily slow down websites if you're not knowing what you're doing. And I've been guilty of this mistake more than once myself, I have to admit. I'm the first to raise my hand for this. And the reason is that the WordPress ecosystem evolves so fast that it's really hard to keep up with it. And in fact, especially when it comes to making website load faster, there are so many variables that you have to look into. You have to look into database queries, into caching, into object caching. You have to look into how much data do you actually need to fetch? How do you store it in the browser memory if you wanted to? What can you do with cookies and session data and stuff like that? And I'm not a professional developer to dive into all those details, but what I know is that on average, the custom code that my team wrote was slowing down the website more than pre-made plugins. And that can be due to the quality of my team, and that can be due to the quality of documentation processes, which, by the way, we are making a video on standard operating procedures that you definitely should check out if you don't have them in place. And obviously you can fix those issues over time, and you can make sure that your custom code doesn't slow down the website by following the WordPress best practices, but it's still a lot easier to slap on a plugin that's already ready-made. And now the fourth point is probably the biggest one. Ready-made plugins come with a ton of documentation. They have, usually at least, professionally designed interfaces with a fantastic UI and UX. And thus they are a lot easier to use for the website owner and for your client who's actually feeding the data most of the time into the website. So let's say you're building a custom plugin for restaurant management software, something like that. Making that UI intuitive to use is really, really hard. Instead of when you just go with a plugin that somebody else has built for the sole purpose of serving restaurant owners and managing restaurants super easy, then they focus on the UI and UX, and you can evaluate if you like their approach or not before choosing the plugin. And you don't have to invent the wheel again. You don't have to build up from scratch. You just use what is already there. And that is the most important thing, is to make the website as easy as possible to use. If your client wants to maintain them and manage them in the future, it needs to be as easy as possible. Now, if you want to go the custom code route, here are 4 steps that you should take. Number 1 is follow the WordPress coding best practices. You never know if you want to introduce more developers in the team if you don't have one already. You don't know if you want to have them on a per project basis as a VA or freelancer, or if you want to make them a fixed team member. But the point is, everybody has a different style of writing code, and that makes maintaining and collaborating on code quite hard. And the WordPress coding best practices are available on the website of WordPress.org, and you can just go through them and follow them. There are even tools like Lintas and stuff like that that you can slap into your IDEs, and then you can have the code be formatted automatically. PHP-CF is one that comes to mind. So automate the coding best practices so that your code always reads the same and looks the same. That's step number 1. If you want to go down that coding route even further, make sure that you have a code versioning system. And that might sound very, very simple and basic, but you would be surprised how many freelancers I speak with who don't use it because they think, well, it's just me. Why would I need a code versioning system like Git or Bitbucket or whatever you want to use, Mercurial maybe? The point is, you need it. You need it because you want to be able to track the revisions of how your code evolved, so that when you introduce the bug, you know exactly what change has caused the bug so that you can revert it easily. You can also automate deployment when you have a code versioning system like Git, for example. It integrates with Jenkins and other automated deployment services that you can then pull into Cloudways, for example, or any other web host that supports it. So you save yourself some time, and you save yourself from making human error essentially in the code deployment when you manually have to deploy the code via SFTP or something like that, and you forget a file, you upload to the wrong repository, something like that. Always happens because we're human. Automate the code versioning, automate the deployment, so that you rule out those mistakes and that you make bug hunting a lot easier for yourself. And the third point is use automated testing. And that comes in with point number 2 about the automated code versioning. You want to be able, before you actually commit your code to the main repository, to the main branch, you want to make sure that your code is being tested. So you can set up automated tests. There's even complete test suites that you can implement straight away that give you like boilerplate tests that you can then expand on for your own code. And what this does, it rules out the most basic mistakes, like forgetting a semicolon somewhere, or having uneven spacing, or the wrong function call, returning an unexpected result, something like that. Automated testing rules that out. It's not the most convenient to implement if you've never done that before, but it is a skill that I think is mandatory. If you want to operate on a high level when writing custom code, having automated tests is mandatory. Now, the fourth point is to really define the functionality before you touch any code. Don't write a single word of code before your client approves the exact functionality. And what I mean by that is you need to be in a stage of the project where your client knows what they get once you have finished your plugin. And most often they have an idea of what you are building, but they have some implicit expectations of functionality and of features that they didn't communicate, maybe because they don't fully understand it themselves. But before you start writing the code, it is super, super important to get everybody on the same page so that A, your client knows what they get and how what they get will lead to the expected business outcome. And B, your team knows exactly what they are building, because the code will consist of multiple components. Then you have the UI layered on top of that. And that all needs to play together nicely. You want to make sure you avoid miscommunication in this stage at the project, even more than in any other stage. Because when you find out that you are 2 weeks into writing a custom plugin, you've written like 5,000 lines of code, maybe 10,000, then making mistakes and reverting features becomes very, very expensive. And your client needs to understand that at some point when they sign off on a functionality, every change request will cost them money and will delay the project. That's a very, very important project management step. Save the best for last, as they said. So this is why it's step number 4 in writing custom plugins. Very, very important to have this process nailed down. So with these 4 steps, I have been able to shave off at least 8 hours a week from the workload of my team. Just by having the automated tests, by having code versioning, and by having automated deployment, we automate so much work and we save ourselves so much time in bug hunting. It's not even funny. And we all make mistakes. I'm not saying I don't have the best developers. Of course I do. Everybody has the best developers in their team. And that's cool. We all need to be the raving fans of our team. That's our job as the agency owner and as the leader. But we need to help them deliver excellence constantly. And that is not by pushing them to write more and more and more, but it is by automating what can be automated. And testing and deployment can be automated. That's what continuous integration processes are. That's what continuous deployment processes are. Familiarize yourself with these terms. Let me know in the comments below this video if you want to learn more about this, because it is something that works with Cloudways and with other web hosts for that matter too. But check in with the web host support team if you want to make sure that you can use CI and CD pipelines in your projects and save yourself the headaches of worrying that custom code rollouts will break the client websites. Subscribe to Cloudways if you want to learn more stuff like this, and if you want to learn more content about how to grow an agency, not just from these very technical topics, but also from marketing, project management, and organizational perspectives, because my fellow Cloudways Mavericks and I will create more content for you very, very soon. And we're excited to sharing our experiences as WordPress agency owners with you and with the entire WordPress ecosystem. Thank you so much for watching.